Good evening, everyone. It's fantastic that you're here to join us. Before we formally get started, could I ask you, please, when you're listening, if you can all put where you're from in the chat, that would be really appreciated. Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's reflections on a year in Parliament with Christian Wakeford MP. My name is Marie van der Zil, and I am the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. The Board of Deputies has hosted a series of webinars on different topics to bring the important conversations to the community, and we are delighted to be joined by so many people from around the country this evening. The Board of Deputies of British Jews is the only democratically elected body which represents the Jewish community in Britain. We work with synagogues and communal organisations from across the country to provide support and to represent the needs and interests of the Jewish community. We are so delighted to have worked together with the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and the region in the planning and arranging of tonight's event, and also to have the Jewish Telegraph as our media partnership. The Jewish Telegraph is Manchester's longest running independent Jewish newspaper, which recently celebrated its 70th birthday. We are grateful to the many synagogues in Bury South who have advertised this event for us, and to some of the synagogues that have partnered with us. We are also most grateful to Christian Wakeford MP for taking time out of his busy schedule and agreeing to be interviewed tonight on our national and local issues. I'm now going to hand over to the Board of Deputies Public Affairs Officer Daniel Sugarman, who will now interview and question Christian Wakeford MP. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Marie. It's a real pleasure to see so many people here this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. As Marie has said, my name is Daniel Sugarman. I am the Public Affairs Officer for the Board of Deputies, and my guest needs no real introduction, I think, for those tuning in, but I will give him an introduction anyway. Of course, Christian Wakeford MP, who is the Member of Parliament for Bury South and has been since December 2019. The first time, of course, that a Conservative has held the seat since 1997. And in fact, Christian is the first non-Jewish MP the seat has ever had in its almost 4-decade history. But I think we can all agree that since taking office, Christian has essentially become an honorary member of the local Jewish community. Myself, I'm proud to be a former constituent of Bury South, where I lived for a few years while studying at university. Again, our audience will know that Bury South, of course, has one of the largest Jewish communities outside of London in the entire country. During his time in Parliament, Christian has become involved with a number of parliamentary organisations affiliated with our community. And as an example, he is the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on British Jews, for which the Board of Deputies provides the Secretariat. And he's also been a very strong advocate in Parliament on issues of concern to the Jewish community, and that will be discussed in more detail later on. Christian, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hosting, Daniel, and thank you for the kind words from both yourself and Marie. I'll apologise to begin with for still being slightly out of breath, although voting for the last hour and 40 minutes and then running across the entire length of the parliamentary estate and then up 4 flights of steps is quite tiring for someone in my poor shape. I'd also like to, before we start, congratulate the JT on their 70 years and Paul Harris for 51 years at the paper. I mean, there are many things you can say. I'll just say, what a mensch.
Thank you so much, Christian. And I think that's a perfect example of how being an MP is very much not a 9-to-5 job by any stretch of the imagination, isn't it? I mean, and for all those who haven't had the opportunity to visit, the parliamentary estate is pretty big. So to run its entire length and then up 4 flights of stairs is quite impressive, I must say. I thought it might be interesting for our audience to find out a bit more about your background. Now, I understand that prior to becoming an MP, you were a borough councillor in Pendle in Lancashire. Pendle, while of course lovely, I'm sure, is not well known for its flourishing Jewish community. what was your first experience of the Jewish community? When did you realize that the seat you were standing for perhaps had a significant Jewish population?
So yeah, I think as you said, Pendle is more renowned for its hill and its witches than its Jewish community. And in fact, I think there might only be one Jewish family, if I recall correctly, that lives in Pendle. So I knew when I applied for the seat, obviously with being about 20 miles away, that obviously the likes of Prestwich, Whitefield, there was a thriving community. So very early on, I set myself a challenge of, I guess, trying to get as involved as I could do, but trying to learn as much as I could do. Because if there was one thing that I was very conscious of, it was going to be a very big learning curve, not only culture, but religion and everything else. So in the, just over 18 months since my selection, whether it's been going to shul, enjoying Kiddush, going to Maccabi, even going to Israel and sampling salt beef, which I'm becoming quite partial to. It's become, to paraphrase, it's been a hell of a journey, but one that I've thoroughly enjoyed. And I think if there's one message from me, it's one of gratitude to the community for actually giving me such a warm and welcoming reception at what at times was a very difficult time for the community.
Absolutely, and seeing as you brought it up, of course, being a new MP, there are a number of challenges, but of course the global pandemic, which has hit our community, the entire country and the world so hard. And I know that you've worked hard locally to help constituents who've been affected by COVID. I wondered whether you might be able to talk us through some of the things that you've been doing on this and how the Bury South community, including, of course, the Jewish community, have come together to help each other in this time of crisis. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I'll extend it slightly. I don't think it's necessarily the Bury South community. I think it's the Manchester community, because obviously it does cross borders into Salford, to Broughton, to Manchester, and even Trafford. So even just today, we set up the strategic group for kind of communications and how best to get that message out, whether it's the regulations, anything that's changing in regards to shul and places of worship. So I think every time we've gone through a change in regulations, through a very quick phone call and being able to send emails out, we've set up meetings very quickly, whether that's with CST, the likes of Rabbi Walker, obviously the Fed, who again do fantastic work. We're able to set up meetings very quickly and make sure we all understand what we can do. If there's any questions from the community, I've tried to get those answered from ministers before I go in, so we don't waste any time in producing literature to get out. So if I recall, when we went into this lockdown on Monday night, there was first call by 12 o'clock noon the next day. We were already having a strategic group meeting, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we already had the literature going out as to what can and couldn't be done. So not even 24 hours. Granted, it's taken a while to get to that point, but I think we now have a very strong, close-knit community which actually covers all areas of the community, whether it's the secular community, the Orthodox, or even the ultra-Orthodox, all are kind of liaising and taking something away from this. So again, it's, thank you to everyone who's engaging in that, and I think we've become a much stronger community because of it.
Absolutely, and obviously it's a really tough time, but it's been really inspiring to see how people have come together in this time of crisis. It's not easy, I imagine. It certainly hasn't been easy adjusting to life as a new MP, particularly some of the pitfalls that might come your way in terms of, learning how business is conducted in the House exactly, and recruiting a capable parliamentary and constituency team. Obviously, that takes time to do. You're essentially having to learn rapidly on the job. And obviously, we've discussed COVID already, but I was wondering what have been some of the most significant challenges for you in adjusting to that new role?
Quite a few. I mean, I was probably one of the last to starting engaging in the terms of recruitment. So obviously, when you become an MP for the first time, if you're a sitting MP, you can just carry on as you were before. But for myself, I actually had to find office premises in the constituency, recruit a team up there, recruit a team down here. But actually, for the first few weeks, because it was that week just before Christmas, I was actually very ill. I think I slept for the majority of 2 weeks, just trying to recover from cold, flu. Granted, I'll blame Habad for that slightly when they asked me to light the menorah, which was obviously a very welcome experience. Granted, if it just told me I was going up a cherry picker in the rain, I might have worn a coat. But I think really no one prepares you for what you need to do at the time. And whilst you might have a rough idea, having worked down here or spoken to colleagues, you literally thrown straight into the frying pan, and there's no real lesson to learn. You're teaching yourself from day one, and you do make mistakes. We are human, but it's ultimately how we learn from those. So I think by the time I finally got my office open, we were closing again 3 weeks later, going into a national lockdown, which was very, very difficult, not just for myself, but for essentially a brand new team, trying to find the way around things, still trying to undertake training, whilst we were actually in the state we were as the nation at that time. So it's very tricky, whilst me trying to learn parliamentary procedure, what to say, what not to say, or where and when to do. But yeah, I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't be in a global pandemic, and I don't think anyone prepared for that. But I think we are getting through it now. We can see that light at the end of the tunnel. It's just unfortunate it came at a time where there were so many new parliamentarians, and we've all had to learn very quickly, and we are where we are now.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that our audience will echo me in saying that we're so happy to see that you're back on your feet after being unwell. And I very much hope that you managed to avail yourself of certain establishments that sell chicken soup within your constituency, because obviously that is a Jewish penicillin, a cure-all for any and all ailments. Earlier this evening, I should tell our audience that Christian ran back from the House of Commons chamber. One of the things that was being discussed was an amendment to a trade bill, and this amendment was nicknamed a Genocide Amendment, and it would have prevented the UK from signing bilateral trade deals with countries deemed by the High Court to be committing a genocide. Now, the Board of Deputies, alongside a number of other Jewish organisations, strongly supported this amendment, and Christian support of this amendment was very much appreciated. The amendment fell just 11 votes short of passing. It will now go back to the House of Lords, where a revised amendment will now be tabled. Of course, the situation in Xinjiang province in China is extremely serious. The president of our organizations, Marie van der Zyl, wrote to the Prime Minister on Friday on this issue. We don't send out such letters on a regular basis, but as Marie wrote in her letter, while our community is always extremely hesitant to consider comparisons with the Holocaust, we do note the similarities between what's alleged to be happening in the People's Republic of China today and what happened in Nazi Germany 75 years ago. People being forcibly loaded onto trains, beards of religious men being trimmed, forced sterilizations, and of course the grim spectre of concentration camps. Now, our audience should also know it's not easy for a new MP to publicly say, I'm going to vote against the government on this issue, but Christian did so, and he deserves our thanks. And not long ago, of course, Christian, you also cited the Chief Rabbi's article on the plight of the Uyghur people when asking what practical steps the Foreign Office were taking to hold China to account. Sorry for the long run-up to the question, but what I wanted to ask was, how can our community work with concerned parliamentarians such as yourself to ensure that as much attention as possible is brought to bear on this humanitarian disaster?
I think, like I've said in similar briefings before, and indeed in the podcast from last week, I think the biggest issue out there is, unless you have communities that are affected, whether it's a Jewish community or a Muslim community, it's not always in the mainstream media. So unless you know what you're looking for or happen to speak to a colleague, it's not going to be the biggest issue coming across your postbox. Now, for me, obviously, it's something I've received a lot of correspondence on for the majority of my term so far. But I would say one thing everyone can do: speak to your friends, no matter where they live in the country. Make sure they're writing to their MP and that they are aware of what's going on. As I said in the chamber last week, we can't afford to mince our words on this issue, and we need to call it out for what it is, and it is genocide. When we're talking about ethnic cleansing, forcible removement, forced sterilization, these things should not be happening at any point in human history. The fact they're happening right now in the 21st century is something, quite frankly, as the world, we should be ashamed of. But certainly, as we are approaching Holocaust Memorial Day, the theme for this year is to be the light in the darkness. So it's time, as the UK, as the mother of all parliaments, for us to be that light in the darkness, to take a stance and say enough is enough. We are going to take this seriously. So it was disappointing the amendment didn't pass today, but it does mean it can go back to the Lords, and we can hopefully deal with some of the issues that members were dealing with, and come back with a more comprehensive amendment that hopefully will get the support from the House, and will make a meaningful change to all those from the Uyghur, from the Rohingya, from any community across the globe that is having these atrocities committed to them.
Absolutely. And of course, the Board of Deputies will continue to be a voice in this regard. Now, some of our audience may have caught your contribution to the House of Commons debate on Iran last month, when you talked about the horrendous anti-Semitism spread by the Iranian regime, the active terror threat the regime poses to Jewish communities around the world, and the need to prescribe Iran's IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And you also, of course, mentioned the wonderful work done by CST to protect our community. I was wondering how it felt for you to realize, and I'm not sure that many people who aren't in the community do realize, the extent of the security measures that our community, not just our community, I should say, but the community, Jewish communities around the world, have to live with. I think these are measures which our community sometimes, I know I do, sometimes treat these as a fact of life, when they very much shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, like you touched on, coming from Pendle, it was never anything I knew about until fully engaging in the campaign process. And it was going to the hustings at the shrubberies, or going to Mazifta, and actually seeing security guards outside and thinking, well, this shouldn't be necessary. I mean, one of my first meetings was actually with CST up at the Fed. And I remember my comment to Amanda at the time, and it's a comment I almost echo every time I meet her. And it's, no offense, but I long for a day when you are no longer needed. Which is very welcome, but it's agreed. But when we think back to the atrocities committed in Argentina with the Emir, and if I recall, it was 85 Jewish civilians who were killed in the attack. And that wasn't just 85 lives, it was hearts being ripped out of the community. So whilst I don't wish for CST to continue for a day longer than they are needed now. And the great work that they do on a daily basis of keeping the community safe. Again, they have my gratitude. It was very welcome to see David Daly actually honoured in the New Year's Honours list for the work he's done. So again, when it comes to CST, that they have an ally in me, that with the work they've done with the anti-Semitism APPG as well. We hoped when the election was over that actually anti-Semitism would start falling with a new era. However, that's not the case. What we are seeing is more conspiracy theories, more online attacks, and we only need to look on social media and see the Wiley scandal from last year, where it took 72 hours for Twitter to take any action, which led to a mass boycott from the Jewish community and its supporters. So it's right, we are bringing forward these concerns in the likes of the online harms bill, but we need to make meaningful change so that the Jewish community aren't just safe on their streets, on university campuses, but online as well.
Absolutely, Christian. Thank you. And of course, the Board of Deputies is currently in discussions with the government about the online harms bill, and we're hopeful that a number of things that we've been pushing for will become part of the legislation in due course. I thought, if I would, that I'd move on to the topic of Israel. And you, of course, are a member of Conservative Friends of Israel. You, of course, as well, will no doubt be aware that the Jewish community, of course, has an extremely strong spiritual, emotional, and familial bond with the state of Israel. When we see people calling for the delegitimization of Israel, and Israel and no other country, that, of course, rings alarm bells for us. And the government's call in the 2019 Queen's speech for measures to prevent local councils effectively operating their own foreign policy was well received by many within the community. And of course, the Prime Minister said, I think in his response to the Queen's speech, he specifically said that councils who do this tend to go after one country and one country only, and we all know which country that is. Of course, over the last year, the response to COVID-19 has taken precedence, as it absolutely should, and the legislation surrounding Brexit, of course, also was high up on the government's agenda. Do you think, though, that after the rollout of the vaccine and please God, the end of the current crisis, this legislation might be revisited?
I do, and as I said in the Shrubberies, 14 months ago now, Israel is a very important ally in the Middle East, but they're not an ally; they're a friend. So we should support them when times are hard, and that means when they are facing attacks from the likes of Hezbollah, Iran, and the Lebanese. But what we need to be doing is taking a real stance moving forward. We have allies throughout the Middle East, but why aren't we at the table helping the expansion of the Abraham Accords? We should be leading from the front, and it's disappointing to see that we're actually absent from all these. Again, there's been concern from my side and from Conservative Friends of Israel in regards to some of the votes that the UK has taken part in regards to the UN. Certainly not something that I'm happy with. But one thing I was very conscious of was my first international visit was to Israel. Now, granted, in hindsight, I should have probably told my wife before I agreed to go. So I think when it came to my first recess, and it's by the way, I'm not spending it with you and my daughter. I'm going to Israel. That took some explaining, but at the same time, it helped add to that kind of the learning curve I was talking about earlier, to learn more about the community that I represent and the passion, the belief they have in what is ultimately the Jewish homeland. The Jewish state of Israel has not only a right to exist, but it's a right to flourish safely. But on the back of that, obviously, I'm an officer for Conservative Friends of Israel, a officer for the APPG on Israel, but I decided I'd go one step further and start learning Hebrew. It's not going very well so far, but I know enough if I'm ever in the middle of Tel Aviv to get enough wine, water, and falafel to last me a week.
That's impressive, and hopefully next time we conduct this, maybe we can conduct it in Hebrew. We'll have to see. And of course, hopefully in due course, next time you go to Israel, your wife and daughter can accompany you. I'm sure that would be appreciated. Moving on to the subject of shechita, if I may, Jewish religious slaughter. Last month, the European Court of Justice upheld a Belgian ban on both kosher and halal slaughter. That was a decision that sent shockwaves around the Jewish world. There are fears that such decisions, which I must say would seem to clash somewhat with the concept of religious freedom, might spread elsewhere, both in the EU but also beyond to our shores. Do you think that the UK might face similar calls in the near future? And do you think there's a proper understanding that these measures are seen by both Jews and Muslims as an attack on their way of life?
I do, and I think it's a very narrow-minded view that tries to hide behind the animal welfare arguments, where ultimately it tends to be very much more of an attack on Muslim culture and the halal as opposed to shechita. But I've already had a meeting with Shechita UK, with Avram Topperman as well. But ultimately, this is an argument I've been having going back to my council days, when even my own group was trying to pass a motion which would prevent unstunned animals from being served in county council establishments. So I stood up against my own group then and said, well, sure, it's for these communities to decide what is and isn't suitable for themselves to eat. We are not a nanny state. The argument is going to come back, and it's going to keep coming back. But it's conversations I've had with Number 10, with Michael Gove at the Cabinet Office, with George Eustace. So whilst there certainly are sympathies towards the argument of going against it, I don't think it's going to be changing anytime soon. Although what has happened in Belgium certainly is potential for a very worrying precedent, which I'm not happy about. We have religious communities who should have a right to express their religious freedoms as well.
Thank you for that, Christian. And I know that it is of comfort that on this issue, as on many others, but on this issue as well, we have support from MPs such as yourself, but also MPs from across the House. In terms of local issues, we received a few questions from constituents. I wanted to bring up something specifically on pavements, actually. We have been led to believe that the state of pavements is not good at the moment. Many pavements being uneven and therefore unsafe, and many side streets still have mulch from October, from when the leaves came off the trees. When these freeze, of course, the pavements become even more dangerous when they already are. Is there any way that you can help with this?
As someone who is notoriously clumsy, unfortunately, I found myself a victim for some of these pavements myself, and I can guarantee falling on a concrete pavement in this weather is neither comfortable nor good for the ego. But yeah, they're more than happy to help. I mean, in regards to fixing them and making them even, that's probably more of a long-term goal, because it does need to go through the council. You're talking, if I think back to my council, normally about 20 working days, so 4 weeks for any meaningful repair, but they have to fit certain criteria. But again, if there's one message, it's please do report them to me in my office. More than happy to take them up with the council and the council leadership, and hopefully we can make the streets safe to walk on, which is ultimately what they're there for. If they're not, people then start walking in the road, which is much more dangerous, especially when the state of the roads are probably worse than the pavement. Definitely,
and of course at the moment, given that people need to keep their distance from each other, the state of the pavements is particularly important. In terms of, and this is an interesting question, because I remember this myself from my time living in Bury South. It relates to the, please God, the post-coronavirus period, specifically to Heaton Park. Now, the Park Life Festival, I will mention for those in the audience who may not know, is an annual local music festival that takes place at Heaton Park. Now, local residents, many of whom are Jewish, have been opposed to this festival for many years. Apart from the very loud noise from the music, which can be heard many miles away, Park Life brings in crowds of people to the local area. Rubbish is strewn on the streets. The festival's held over the weekend, and many Jewish residents feel vulnerable and threatened when they're walking home from dinner on a Friday night or going to and from synagogue on a Saturday, on Shabbat. Now, we of course understand that Park Life brings in revenue to Manchester and to Heaton Park, but the impact it has on all residents nearby, many of whom are Jewish, for a whole weekend should probably be balanced against that. Is there anything that can be done about this?
Well, I know Councillor Silbadger has raised this many times. I mean, whilst we always have to provide opportunities for people enjoying themselves, actually, we need to make sure the community is safe. And like I said, it isn't just loud music. It is people coming, getting excessively drunk, using drugs, dealing drugs, and that's intimidating for anyone, let alone the Jewish community. So the number of people who have had contact me about it does need to be rethought. And the question is a place like Heaton Park, where it's surrounded by residential areas, suitable for something of this nature? I would argue that it's not. So we do need to be engaging with all the community around the area and making sure that they are actually not only heard but listened to, because that's one thing that is missing far too often in politics, both nationally and locally. We consult a lot, but do we actually listen? So it's certainly one thing that I would be keen on, because we need to tackle the crime but make sure it's safe.
Thank you for that. And of course, many of our audience will be aware Heaton Park is a stunning park, beautiful park, which is a pleasure to have in the area, and it's even more of a pleasure when residents can use it properly. Now we have a question from the audience, which is specifically people are interested as to how you became involved in politics in the first place. So I'll leave that to you.
Weirdly, my first venture into politics, which is ironic because my great uncle was the former town clerk for Nelson, but also a stalwart for the Labour Party. So my first venture into politics was doing politics for A-level. I didn't really have any interest in politics at the time. It was mainly my friend did it, and I thought it would be nice to have a class with my friend each week and go to the pub afterwards. However, it was something that I quickly became engrossed in. It was the topic I enjoyed the most, so I did it for my degree. Realised very quickly that I followed the Conservative ideology and joined the party. Wow, well, almost a lifetime ago now. It's 18 years, so pretty much my entire adult life has been in the party. And slowly, I just got more and more involved through an activist, association chairman, then became the chairman for Lancashire and deputy chairman for the whole Northwest for the party, which looked after 75 constituencies. Which is fine until they give you jobs like filling nomination papers in the middle of Knowsley, which for any Conservative is a tough job. When you're a Conservative without a local accent, it's even tougher. But yeah, it's something I've never looked back on, and I think the cliches there are you get involved to improve people's lives, and I ask myself every day, would my father be proud of what I've done? And if he isn't, then I wouldn't do it. But I lost my father at the age of 11, and that still today is my kind of driving mantra, if you will.
That's fascinating to hear about, and it's particularly interesting. I've always found when someone perhaps comes from a different political tradition but decides to essentially go their own way. And I mean, there's a fair amount of that in politics, but it's always interesting to see. In terms of another local question which has come in, people are interested to know how exactly the vaccine rollout and take up in Bury South is going at the moment. So a question which, of course, is important.
I was in conversation with the council leadership and the CCG on Friday of last week. So far in Bury, so not just for South but North as well, 11,000 people have been vaccinated already. This week, they're expecting another 8,000 to be vaccinated. And they are extremely confident of meeting the Prime Minister's target of having those 4 key vulnerable groups vaccinated by the mid-Feb target. Obviously, then we have the pressure of how quick can we ramp up vaccinations afterwards to make sure that, like Israel, we have all of the adult population immunised as quick as possible. So I think whilst Israel will have it done by the end of March at this rate, we're going to be slightly later. But I think really, we are doing a lot. There's a lot of thanks and gratitude to go around. But if there's one message that can go out, it is, if you do get that letter, please do get immunized. For every 25 vaccinations, we save a life. So that may be yours, that may be someone that you're close to, but there is a key role to get out there, and it is get vaccinated, get safe, and we can get through this together.
Definitely. And actually, as a follow-up to that, I was wondering whether you've seen any kind of anti-vax material that's been making the rounds, and obviously it's something of some concern, and is present in many communities. Sadly, there is a measure of that within our own community. What message do you have for those who are spreading that sort of material?
It's what I mean. I try to be as tolerant as possible, but I think when it's messages of that nature, we do have to come out and call it out for what it is, and it's wrong. Now, granted, I'm one of those who 10 years ago I got bored and did a second degree in chemistry, which specialised in drug design and synthesis. So I do know a bit about going through the vaccine process and how you would normally, I mean, granted, it would normally take a longer time, but the actual, whereas normally you'd be talking a couple of years, that has been sandwiched into months, but the same lab time, if that makes sense, has been fulfilled because they have been working around the clock. So I think really, we call it out. There's been a lot of talk, certainly in the Muslim community, which is why there's such a low uptake from the Muslim community, where there's accusations that there's porcine gelatin involved in the vaccine. That's not true either. But I think all we can do is show that it's safe, that for any side effects that there are, and I'm not saying there aren't any, but they are mainly mild. And again, it is the safest way to get through this quickly, safely, and reopen the economy and get back to the way of life we all enjoyed 12 months ago.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that many of our audience will be aware that a lot of the anti-vax stuff that's out there is also connected with various anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, there is this thing that if you believe in one conspiracy theory, you're more likely to believe others, and that's also of some worry. I have a question from Jeremy here, not Jeremy Corbyn, I should say. The Conservative Party, he says, is as a low tax party, yet COVID-19, obviously the economy is going to be affected heavily by this. How do you see the Conservative government refloating the economy post-pandemic without raising taxes? Jeremy says he's personally in favour of rebooting the economy and would accept higher taxes, but what's your feeling about this, Christian?
Well, I'm glad it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. I'd probably channel my inner Gavin Williamson and tell him to shut up and go away. But yeah, in regards to that question, it is a tough one because like any Conservative, I am intrinsically looking for low taxes and what we can do, but we have borrowed billions this year to keep people safe and to try to restart the economy when things were improving last year. On average, every single day we're in lockdown cost £1 billion. So I think the best message we can do is reopen things as quick as possible, but only when it's safe to do so. So again, it goes back to that vaccination message. It goes back to maintaining hands, face, space. And I'm one with a beard and glasses. I don't like wearing a face mask, but I do it to protect other people as much as I do myself. So I think really we follow the guidance as close as we can do, and we get out of this quicker than we would do otherwise. But in regards to the actual economy, I think there's two trains of thought. One is, do you increase tax and therefore tax revenue, or do you try to promote spending? So whether it is notions like the Eat Out to Help Out, what can we do to get people going back to our hospitality venues, to invest in our tourist economy? So I think really we find schemes to promote spending rather than taxation. But I think where we are now, whilst I don't like the idea, we may well need to increase some form of tax. And I think really it's very difficult to argue against that.
Of course, it's a very tough situation. Obviously, the economy is suffering at the moment, but of course people's lives take priority, and obviously there'll be some very tough decisions to be made in the future, and we'll see what happens. Another question from our audience. Tomorrow, of course, is Inauguration Day over in the United States. And of course, we hope that goes smoothly, considering the rather disturbing scenes that have happened in recent days in Washington, D.C. How do you see the UK, US, and also, I guess, Israel relationships changing with regard to the fact we've got a new administration coming in?
I see it as potentially quite a mixed situation. Did the Abraham Accords happen because of Trump, or did they happen in spite of Trump and he just happened to be there? I think really what we need to make sure is that impetus continues. So really we need the UK back at the table well, not back at the table, coming to the table in the first instance to make sure they continue. But I think really in terms of international diplomacy, relations between the UK and US and US and Israel and the Middle East, I think it's just welcome to have the adults back at the table again. So hopefully common sense can prevail, and in terms of the Middle East, we can finally get to the point of a true two-state solution that ultimately we all want, to make sure that peace, prosperity, and trade continues as much everywhere as it can do.
Definitely. And I think, I know I myself was, but I think a lot of us were moved to see, for example, flights from Israel landing in the United Arab Emirates and things like that, things that I never really thought could happen. And it does seem as if there are more possibilities out there. Hopefully we're moving into a brighter future for the region as a whole, and hopefully the new administration can continue and strengthen the Abraham Accords, and progress can be made with other countries. I have a question here from the Jewish Manchester group, saying, we know you're doing a great job for the local community and local constituents, and they thank you for that. But they ask, how do you yourself evaluate your first year in office as an MP?
It's like marking my own homework. What was I'd love to say 10 out of 10. There's always room for improvement. I think really we've learned a lot of lessons, and I certainly would have done things differently in hindsight. So when the pandemic was first coming, and people stopped handshaking and went to the elbow bump, which I still hate now. I was ignoring that and going around shaking hands still, and then I got COVID myself. So I was very conscious, and whilst many colleagues across the country were out volunteering, I was taking a step back, thinking, well, how do I keep myself and my family safe? So whilst I was continuing my duties, I think in hindsight I'd have probably engaged a lot more across the entire board. I'd give myself a C+. I'll be harsh on myself and say that it's a pass, but room for improvement. And to carry on with some of the work we are doing. There's always criticism from opposition as to your forward policy. I would hope, with the fact I've rebelled, well, especially after today, 3 times now, that it does show that I can be independent-minded. I do try to do the best for not only the community but the constituency. People might disagree with that, and I'm more than happy to have a reasoned discussion, preferably over a pint when pubs reopen. But I think really, it's about compassion and commonsensical discourse, which again seems to be missing far too much in a very polarized political world at the moment.
Definitely. And I hadn't actually realized, you said you were unwell, but I hadn't realized that you'd actually had COVID-19 yourself. And I'm obviously very happy that you're feeling better. If you don't mind me asking, when you had COVID, was it like nothing you had felt before? Was this like, okay, I have COVID?
It was quite possibly the most awkwardly timed kind of illness I ever had. So I moved into my London flat on the Sunday, started feeling a bit queasy Monday night, and then Tuesday was starting to realise that actually it was probably a bit more serious. So it felt like the worst flu I've ever had, but with the addition of kind of feeling like someone was sat on my chest for 2 weeks. What made it worse was because I'd just moved into my flat, I had no TV, I had 1 book, no broadband connection. So let's just say Amazon was used a lot in those coming days.
Wow. Okay. 1 book. I imagine you got to know that book very well. So another question that's come in is actually from Russell Conn, who will be joining us shortly. He says, Christian, you very kindly mentioned the work of the strategic group. What difference do you think this collaboration and cooperation has achieved?
I think, if anything, it's made the community stronger. I mean, again, there are so many kind of silver linings from the incredibly dark time of COVID, whether it's people volunteering, befriending, preventing social isolation. but actually having all sections of the community coming together, whether that is the Rep Council, the Fed, the Herschel Vice Centre, the Shomrim, so many people come together. And I mean, don't get me wrong, when we were approaching Passover and there was hour-long conversations about bread, there were times some of the conversations were difficult, but I think there's a lot of the London community can learn from what we've done in Greater Manchester. And I think when they've seen how quick we've been to react on a lot of this, I think really it just goes to show the strength, not only of the characters, and there are far too many to thank individually, but not only the characters, but the organisations. It really does show that not only do we have these organisations, not only do we have a community, but there's a real heart in that community.
Definitely, and Manchester is well known, not just the Jewish community, although the Jewish community is known for its friendliness, but also the overall Manchester community is known for its warmth.
We are friendly up north.
Absolutely. Although the next question might actually bring us to some rivalry. This is one of the most important questions of the night, I gather. The question from Andy is quite simple, and it is City or United?
Well, I said in the strategic group today, when it was mentioned about invites to the Etihad to take part in vaccines, I said there is no need to go to the Etihad, ever. So it is the only time I am happy to say that Manchester is red.
Well, that's I'm sure it's comforting for people to know that there are multiple places within the city to get vaccinated at. Although, of course, if you get the invite to go and it's to the Etihad, please do go to the Etihad. Well, thank you so much for that. One more question, I think, that has come in from Ruth. She suggests the possibility of course, the government had its Eat Out to Help Out scheme that operated last year. She was wondering about the possibility of a similar scheme for holidaying in the UK, or perhaps visiting the theatre to help out when it's safe to do so. Is that something that might be considered?
Yeah, I think anything we can do to benefit our tourist sector. I mean, whether it's the lakes, the South Downs, Wales, for some of my family where we come from in South Devon, so many communities have been struggling because of COVID, and I think anything we can do, whether it's the B&B sector, hotels, theatres, even outdoor activity centres. We need to be doing everything we can to try to get back to pre-COVID levels as quick as possible. So whether it's vouchers or some kind of incentive, it has to be embraced.
Absolutely, and hopefully, of course, it will be. I was wondering. This is something that I've asked a lot of people, and I think a lot of people spent time thinking about. And it's this: when, please God, lockdown lifts and the situation returns to relative normalcy, what exactly do you want to be doing? I mean, what do you what sort of things do you want to do?
Well, I mean, something most people don't know about me is I have an identical twin brother. So he's actually a nurse on a COVID ward. So I've not seen him for a long time. I know he's been having a tough time of late. So it would be to go have a pint with my twin brother and actually just spend time with friends and family. And I think that's been the most difficult part of the pandemic, certainly for the north, where we've been in these heightened restrictions since the end of July now. If it's potentially March until some of these are looking at being lifted, that's a hell of a long time to not see your family, your friends, your loved ones. So I think really, going to the pub with my brother is, it's probably not the most highbrow of things I can think of, but I can't think of many places I'd much rather be. No,
absolutely. That sounds wonderful. Really does. And I think that many, in fact, all of the people watching this will feel similarly. There's so many family members that we haven't been able to. I mean, of course, you can video call nowadays. Thank God we have that technology, but it's not the same as being able to be in someone's presence. And I really hope that will be something that we can do again soon. Christian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight. It's been a real pleasure to discuss so many important issues with you. I'm going to hand over in a second to Russell Conn, who will deliver a closing speech. But I want to thank you, of course. I want to thank our audience for joining us. I want to thank the different synagogues who have been involved in publicising this event, as well as working with the Board of Deputies to arrange it. And I also want to thank the Jewish Telegraph, of course, as you have, who of course are celebrating 7 decades this year, which is remarkable, and for their help in putting tonight's event together as our media partner. And thank you so much. I will now hand over to Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm Russell Conn. As my strapline says, I'm the president of the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and Region. As a council, we've been really delighted to partner with our colleagues, if you like, at the Board of Deputies for this evening's event. And I must say a very special thank you to the board, to Marie, the president, to Sarah Radivan, Judy Silko, and of course to you, Daniel, in the very, very eloquent way that you've asked the questions. Christian, you are an indefatigable MP, if I may say so. Your schedule is daunting, your work is legendary, and you will forgive me if I say that you had a very hard act to follow, following Ivan Lewis, who was the MP and a very, very successful MP for very many years. But you have done an unbelievable job in very, very short time and under very, very difficult circumstances. You've now become, without question, a very valued and certainly a vital member of our community. And I know from working with you on so many organisations and committees that you are constantly in our corner and striving to do everything you possibly can for the constituents that you have the honour to represent. Also must pay a special thank you to the other partner this evening, Jewish Telegraph, and Mazel Tov again to Paul and everyone connected with the Jewish Telegraph for reaching the 70-year milestone, and for his own personal 51 years. Gosh, makes him sound very, very old. You can't believe he's exactly the same age as me. Mazel Tov to him, and of course to the paper as well. Also must pay special thanks to all the local synagogues in the Bury South constituency who have kindly advertised this evening's event so we could try and get to as large an audience as possible. And I'm no doubt Judy at the board later in the week will hopefully be able to tell us what the numbers were zooming in or joining in for this evening's event. And a very special thank you to each and every one of you for joining us this evening. I hope you found this very informative. I hope you have found it enlightening. I certainly have. And on behalf of the Rep Council and everyone here this evening, may I wish you, all of you, the very best of health. Please stay safe. The vaccine is coming. I got my own call today. I feel quite proud and privileged. And I'm off tomorrow to the Irish Centre, not the Etihad, to the Irish Centre. I've been spared that. To the Irish Centre to get my jab, and I'll be more than happy to fill anyone in afterwards and tell you what the experience is like. But please God, the vaccine, as I've said, is coming, and one day, very, very soon, we'll all be able to return to some kind of normality. So on behalf of everyone connected with the Representative Council and the Board of Deputies, thank you again to you, Christian. Thank you to you, Daniel, for the very excellent way you asked the questions and dealt with the online questions. And thank you once again to everyone who has streamed in this evening. What I hope you will agree has been a very, very informative and, dare I say, it's entertaining evening. Thank you very much to one and all.
Thank you.